And we are back. Okay, so what we just did a few moments ago, magically, was that we took the orders microservice, incorporated it into our monolithic application, and we have basically split off one chunk of this application. Now we want to do the same thing with the products aspect. So if you remember in here, we have this list of products, right? Nice metal camping mug, bike, so on and so forth. This is still part of that big React application. We want this to be its own microservice as well. I'm going to basically speed through this aspect a little bit because it's effectively the same thing. We are going to submit a Docker build to the G-Cloud build, the Google Cloud build engine. We're going to add that to our kube control, our kube container, and then we are going to basically just deploy it and expose it. Same process as before, different microservice, but effectively the same procedure. So now we're going to go into the correct directory. Sorry, products. All right, same thing here. We have a Docker file, we have a package.json file, we have another server.js file. Again, this is just a simple JavaScript application that we have here, npm or node or whatever it is. Again, we don't necessarily care as long as data in and out makes sense. Yeah, so it's just a node application. Okay, so we want this to build. So we will copy this bit of code. This is version 1. Submit it. And we need to authorize this. I reconnected and there was about an hour in between the last chunk of this. So I'm guessing some things get disabled here. Oh, I'm in the wrong project, that's why. Good thing to demonstrate. It swapped projects on me. G-Cloud projects list. Got too many projects. We'll just do it the quick way. Quick this. Here's the ID. G-Cloud set projects cloud G-Cloud. So you can see I don't have the code or the commands memorized here. Config set. There we go. To refresh my memory there. G-Cloud config set project. There we go. Let's try this deployment again. That's better. All right, so we have deployed our application to be built. Now we want to send the container to the Kubernetes engine. So as before, we want to use the kube control command to create the deployment. We're going to call it products, version 1.0. Going to point it to the correct location, submit that, and it takes very little time. Now, also same as before, we want to expose port 80 and route it to port 8082. Effectively, we are telling our microservice how to communicate with our monolithic app and back. So let's expose this side of things. And I have the wrong command copied here. Product exposed. We can now see the JSON packet in the browser if we would like, after we get an IP address. That's still pending. And if we want to check the JSON once that IP pops up, it's going to be /API/orders, and you can see what the monolithic application will consume. So we're still pending here. Taking a little bit longer than usual. Okay. So 35.196.92.88, this will be different for all of you. Again, this is an ephemeral IP address, so it's going to change over time. And if I pop it in to my browser, can't find it because we don't have anything on this route. What we want is API/products. So API, that should be API/products. Is it just not spun up yet? There we go. So here is all of the images that are going to pop into our React application. And we're going to see this MS dash for microservice. So again, we're going to get a nice little visual that things are happening. If we look at it right now, again, we haven't updated the config, so there looks to be no difference here until we reconfigure our monolithic application, which just means reconfiguring our React app to point elsewhere. So let's go back into the React app directory. We're going to update our configuration file here. Same as before, products has its own routes. Right now it's internal. Let's make that external. And that is good. So kind of again, just to really contextualize what's going on here, let me undo this so you can see. Before we had the /service/products, this is basically like a RESTful call where the React app, the monolithic React app is going to say, hey, somebody requested IP address /service/products, do something with that. What we're doing here though, is we're replacing this with a call to some other service, which exists on this IP address with this particular route. So the service that lives at that IP is going to say, okay, it's at API/products. I know what data to return. We are going to return this JSON packet here. If you remember from before, when I just went to nothing, right? So I didn't have any extra REST calls there at the end. It doesn't know what to do with it. There is no route that we have to handle the base route. Obviously, you would put something here so that a real application would fail a little bit more gracefully if this were the case. So we have reconfigured our config file here. Now we'd have to rerun our build again. We need to tell our React application to actually consume this information. Then after that, we're going to rebuild it in Google Cloud Build. We're going to deploy it to Kubernetes. And then after some magic behind the scenes with Kubernetes and Docker kind of playing nicely together, we're going to have a nice little application. This will take a moment as well. All right, our NPM build is now done. Now let's redo our deployments here. So let's go back into our application. Let's submit a new build. Again, making sure to increment the version number. We were at 2.0.0 before, so we're just going to increment the major number to 3. Remember, it was 2. Let's go ahead and do that. Again, this will take a moment, and then we will deploy to Kubernetes. Okay, so the build was sent. Appears to have been successful. We see that little success tag there. Now let's send it to Kubernetes. Again, making sure that version number matches so that it knows which particular container to pull. It has been updated. And now, assuming that everything is good with our Kubernetes project here, so kube control, get service products, have our IP. We just do get service. Let's see what we have. We have our monolith, still has our application. And if we pop back here, I was just basically checking to make sure everything had an IP that needed it. If I refresh, hey, this is updated. We are now pulling this information from our microservice. And our order still looks the same. It is its own thing. Again, we can look at this inside of our Cloud Console as well. If we go to, say, Kubernetes engine, still see our cluster here. It's running 3 nodes, 6 CPUs, 12 gigs of memory. We have a nice little load-balanced React application running here. We can get all the information we need about, I guess, everything about it. How much storage it's taking, any errors or anything that is already cropped up in our logs. You know, we see all these request updates. We're obviously rebuilding and doing lots of stuff with that. We can also check out our cloud builds engine. Here's all the builds that we have performed. Again, this is where we took our Docker containers and built them. You know, we could configure that however we wanted. But again, if you need that history, it's in here. Okay, so we have our products list, we have our orders list. Last thing we have to do is migrate that front end. So our home page here. Maybe we want this to be a microservice as well. Why not? So let's create a new one here. Let's go ahead and follow. I need to get back into the Cloud Console or the Cloud Shell here. So let's go into our React app. We're going to copy our script or our configuration file here. And let's build that. So effectively what we're doing in this step while this builds is that we are building a fresh front end. Again, we're going to deploy it as a Docker container to Kubernetes, and that's all going to handle that. And then we're going to completely delete the monolith, and it's going to run by itself like magic. Hey, new version of NPM available. Nifty. Alrighty, so we have basically made a copy of our environment script, and we've done an NPM build, so the life is good there. Let's go into our Monolith microservice front end. And in here, you're going to see very similar things. We have a Docker file, package, server, same stuff. We're just writing a little tiny Express application to handle our microservice for us. Same idea, do a gcloud build. Now we're building the front end, version 1.0.0. It's going to take a hot minute, and then we'll be back. 15. Okay, so that has been deployed, it's been built with Docker. Now, what we need to do is deploy it to Kubernetes. Again, same process as before, just basically make sure the version numbers match and you're good. That has been created. Going to do our exposing of our ports. So here we're going to look at port 8080, 280. Get that going. Server front end has been exposed. Greater internet can see it. Let's check our... I'm going to skip ahead a step here just so you can make sure that we have something there. I'm just waiting for this external IP to resolve. Still pending. There we go. So we have our front end. Go ahead and check it. It exists. That is good. Oops, I wanted that still up. Okay, so we have our front end. That is a microservice. We have our products page. We have our orders page. Those are all separate services, which, again, microservice is just a tiny little application that effectively transforms data for you. Now let's get rid of this monolith. So we are basically getting rid of that whole massive application. It's no longer going to consume any resources for us. So cube control, delete, deployment, monolith. Again, that's what we named it. Name it whatever you like. That is now gone. Let's get rid of this service as well. That is now gone too, in a moment anyway. And what we should see once this finishes and we look up our services again is that this monolith service in our cluster is going to not be there, meaning it's not going to be accessible. So if we do kube control get services, we do not see monolith in here anymore, right? Which means our fancy store is never going to resolve because the service that exists on this IP address no longer exists. And again, what this means to you is that you don't have this massive application, and massive in quotes, because obviously it's not doing anything too hard right now. It doesn't exist anymore. So if we pop over to Kubernetes engine, we see fancy cluster, but what we shouldn't see in here are any calls to the monolith service. So if we go through the logs, like in great detail, we're never going to see a request for a monolith anymore. It's not going to take up any storage, not any resources, nothing. It's all microservice based now. But what we can do is we can go to our front end, right? So we have an external IP for that. Going to close you, pop that in. Here's our fancy store. Here's our microservice-based product page, microservice-based order page, microservice-based front-end page. Why would you want to do this? Maybe you have an old massive application that you want to split up. Maybe you're looking to try the newest and latest and greatest and most exciting thing is splitting up big applications into little tiny ones. But again, now we have very compartmentalized pieces of an application that we can manage separately. If somebody screws up something in the products page, that's not going to impact the orders page, right? They are their own separate applications, and that's kind of nice from a software engineering perspective, really. So we have our page, life is good. Only thing left to do is to clean things up here, and hopefully remember this from the very beginning. Make sure you created a brand new project for this. If you didn't, you have a whole list of objects to clean up and delete, and it's going to be a lot more difficult than simply deleting the project. So to do that, I'm just going to do a gcloud projects delete on our project ID. Right, so if I do a clear gcloud projects delete my project name. Are you sure? Yes. It was going to be selected by default, but I wanted to make sure that that happened. One thing to note, since we haven't really done this before, if you did this by accident, you can undelete it, right? You basically have a small grace period to undo it if there were things in your project that you need to maybe migrate to another project. Just be aware that once that grace period is gone, it's gone forever. So with that, our fancy store is still up because the clusters are still up. Again, you have a few moments before it goes down. But other than that, good job. You have done it. There are a whole list of other tutorials you could follow here or resources for how to do other interesting things with Kubernetes and Docker. So feel free to check those out. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know, email or Discord or however you want to get a hold of me. Otherwise, good luck. Bye, everybody.